The morning sun cut through the tall windows of Westbrook Preparatory Academy, casting long shadows across the polished hallways. It was the kind of school that looked like it belonged in a movie. Old brick buildings covered in ivy, perfectly trimmed lawns, students walking around in blazers and ties like they were already running the world. Darnell Williams had been a student here for 3 years now, and he still felt like an outsider. Not because anyone said anything directly, not because there were signs on the doors telling him he didn't belong. It was subtler than that. It was in the way certain teachers looked past him in class, the way some students moved their bags when he sat down, the way people seemed surprised whenever he answered a question correctly. He was one of only a handful of black students in the entire school. His mother had worked 2 jobs to afford the tuition, believing that a school like Westbrook would open doors for her son. And Darnell was determined to prove her right. He kept his head down. He studied hard. He never complained, even when he had every reason to. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Darnell grabbed his backpack, kissed his mother goodbye, and caught the early bus across town. He liked getting to school before most other students arrived. The library was quiet at that hour, and he could get an extra hour of studying done before first period. Chemistry was his favorite subject. There was something about the precision of it that spoke to him. The way elements combined in predictable patterns. The way you could solve problems step by step, following the logic until you reached the answer. It wasn't about opinions or interpretations. It was about facts. And facts didn't care what you looked like or where you came from. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a different story. She was a thin woman in her late 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and glasses that always seemed to sit at the very tip of her nose. She had been teaching at Westbrook for over 20 years, and she made sure everyone knew it. Her classroom walls were covered with awards and certificates, photos of her shaking hands with former students who had gone on to become doctors and scientists. Darnell had noticed something about those photos. In all 20-something years of teaching, there wasn't a single black face among her success stories. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, Darnell had learned to keep his guard up around her. Mrs. Patterson had a habit of calling on him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. She would ask complicated questions, the kind that weren't even in the textbook, and then give a small satisfied smile when he struggled to answer. When he did answer correctly, she would pause, look at him for a long moment, and then move on without a word of acknowledgement. But Darnell didn't let it get to him. He had bigger things to focus on. For the past year, he had been preparing for the regional science competition. It was a big deal. Students from schools across 3 counties would take a standardized exam covering chemistry, biology, and physics. The top scorers would receive scholarships, recognition, and a serious boost to their college applications. Darnell wanted to win. Not just place, not just do well. He wanted to be the best. Every night after finishing his homework, he would study for an extra 2 hours. He borrowed college-level textbooks from the public library. He watched online lectures from professors at universities he dreamed of attending. He filled notebook after notebook with practice problems, working through each one until the solutions came to him as naturally as breathing. His mother would sometimes find him asleep at his desk, his face pressed against the pages of a chemistry book. She would drape a blanket over his shoulders and whisper a quiet prayer. She didn't fully understand the formulas and equations that filled his notebooks, but she understood hard work. And she had never seen anyone work harder than her son. The day of the competition arrived on a cold Saturday in November. Darnell took 3 buses to get to the testing center at the community college across town. His hands were shaking a little as he walked through the doors. Not from fear, but from anticipation. He had been waiting for this moment for so long. The exam room was filled with students from different schools. Most of them looked confident, comfortable, like they had been preparing for moments like this their entire lives. A few of them glanced at Darnell as he took his seat. He recognized the look, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the unspoken question of whether he was in the right place. Darnell ignored them. He took out his pencils, set them neatly on the desk, and waited for the proctor to hand out the exams. The test was hard, harder than he had expected. But as he worked through each section, something clicked. The hours of studying, the late nights, the extra practice problems, it all came together. He moved through the questions with a calm focus, double-checking his work, making sure he didn't make any careless mistakes. When the proctor called time, Darnell set down his pencil and let out a long breath. He had done everything he could. Now all he could do was wait. 2 weeks later, the results came in. Mrs. Patterson stood at the front of the classroom, holding a stack of papers. The students sat in their seats, buzzing with nervous energy. The competition results were supposed to be announced today, and everyone wanted to know how they had done. Darnell sat near the back of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. He had tried not to think about the results too much. He didn't want to get his hopes up. But deep down, a small voice kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, he had done something special. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat and began reading the results in her usual flat, emotionless tone. Third place went to a student from another school. Polite applause. Second place went to a girl from Westbrook named Catherine Reynolds. She smiled and accepted the congratulations from her classmates. Then Mrs. Patterson paused. She looked down at the paper in her hand and her expression changed. Her brow furrowed. Her lips pressed together into a thin line. The silence stretched on for an uncomfortable moment. Finally, she spoke. But her voice was different now, slower, almost reluctant. "First place," she said, "with a perfect score of 100%. The highest in the entire district." She looked up from the paper and stared directly at Darnell Williams. For a moment, Darnell couldn't move. A perfect score. The highest in the district. He had actually done it, but the celebration he expected never came. There was no applause. No cheers, just silence. And then whispers. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him. Could see the disbelief on their faces. Mrs. Patterson set down the paper and removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose like she had just developed a sudden headache. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "that's certainly unexpected." Darnell felt the word like a punch to the gut. Unexpected, not impressive. Not wonderful, unexpected. She looked at him again, and this time there was no mistaking the expression on her face. It wasn't pride. It wasn't congratulations. It was suspicion. "I'll need to verify these results with the district office," she continued, not taking her eyes off him. "There may have been some kind of error." A few students snickered. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Darnell sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles ached. He had worked for this. He had earned this. And now, instead of celebrating, he was being treated like a suspect. Mrs. Patterson moved on to other announcements, but Darnell barely heard a word. His mind was racing. His chest felt tight. All those late nights, all that sacrifice, and this was how it was being received. When the bell finally rang, he gathered his things and walked out of the classroom without looking at anyone. He could feel Mrs. Patterson's eyes following him all the way to the door. He didn't know it yet. But this was only the beginning. What started as a moment of triumph was about to turn into the fight of his life. And before it was over, everyone at Westbrook Preparatory Academy would learn a lesson they would never forget. The next few days were some of the longest of Darnell's life. He went to school, sat through his classes, and tried to act like everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Word had spread fast. By the end of that first day, it seemed like everyone at Westbrook knew about his perfect score. And more importantly, they knew about Mrs. Patterson's reaction. The whispers followed him everywhere he went. In the hallways. In the cafeteria. Even in classes that had nothing to do with chemistry, some students congratulated him quietly, giving him small nods or quick handshakes when no one else was looking. But others weren't so kind. He heard the comments. The jokes made just loud enough for him to hear. "No way he got that score on his own. I heard they're investigating him. My dad says those tests are impossible to cheat on. But I don't know." Darnell tried to ignore it. He told himself that it didn't matter what people thought. He knew the truth. He had studied harder than anyone. He had earned that score, but the doubt in other people's eyes was starting to wear on him. It's one thing to believe in yourself. It's another thing entirely when it feels like the whole world is waiting for you to be exposed as a fraud on Thursday afternoon. Darnell was sitting in the library, trying to focus on his calculus homework, when a freshman he didn't recognize approached his table. "Are you Darnell Williams?" the kid asked nervously. Darnell nodded. "Mrs. Patterson wants to see you in her classroom. She said to come right now." Darnell's stomach dropped. He had been waiting for this, dreading it. He packed up his books slowly, trying to steady his nerves. Whatever was about to happen, he told himself, he would face it with his head held high. The walk to Mrs. Patterson's classroom felt longer than usual. The hallway was empty. Most students had already gone home or were at after-school activities. His footsteps echoed off the tile floor. By the time he reached her door, his heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. He knocked twice. "Come in." Mrs. Patterson was sitting behind her desk, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She wasn't alone. Sitting in a chair beside the desk was a man Darnell didn't recognize. He was wearing a gray suit and had a clipboard in his lap. His expression was impossible to read. "Sit down, Darnell," Mrs. Patterson said, gesturing to an empty chair across from her. Darnell sat. He kept his back straight and his hands in his lap, determined not to show how nervous he was. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. "This is Mr. Hoffman from the district's Academic Integrity Office. He's here to ask you a few questions about the regional science competition." Darnell felt his mouth go dry. Academic integrity. They were really doing this. They were actually investigating him for cheating. Mr. Hoffman leaned forward slightly. "Darnell, I want you to understand that this is just a routine inquiry. When a student achieves an exceptional score, we sometimes conduct a review to ensure the integrity of the testing process. It's nothing personal." But it felt personal. It felt very personal. "I didn't cheat," Darnell said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "I studied for over a year. I can show you my notebooks. I can show you the practice tests I took. I earned that score." Mr. Hoffman nodded slowly, making a note on his clipboard. "No one is accusing you of anything at this point. We're simply gathering information." But Mrs. Patterson clearly had a different view. "Darnell," she said, leaning forward, "I've been teaching for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of students come through this school. Some of them brilliant, some of them not so much." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "In all that time, I've never seen a student with average classroom performance suddenly achieve a perfect score on a district-wide exam. You have to understand why that raises questions." Darnell felt something hot rise in his chest. Average classroom performance. Is that what she thought of him? He had earned solid grades in her class. Not perfect, but good. And he had worked twice as hard as most of the other students just to get those grades, because she never gave him the benefit of the doubt. She called on him when she wanted to embarrass him. She graded his papers harder than everyone else's. And now she was using his grades in her class as evidence that he couldn't possibly be smart enough to succeed. "My classroom grades don't reflect what I know," Darnell said carefully. "I've been studying advanced material on my own. College-level textbooks, online courses. I prepared specifically for this competition." Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow. "And yet you never thought to demonstrate that knowledge in my class?" "With respect, Mrs. Patterson, your tests cover the curriculum. The competition covered much more than that. I studied beyond what was required because I wanted to win." There was a long silence. Mr. Hoffman scribbled something on his clipboard. Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't change, but Darnell could see something flicker in her eyes. She wasn't used to students pushing back. "Here's what's going to happen," she said finally. "The district has agreed to allow you to retake the exam. A different version, of course, to prevent any possibility of memorization. You'll take it here at the school, under supervised conditions. If you achieve a similar score, then we'll consider the matter closed." Darnell stared at her. "You want me to take the test again?" I think it's the fairest solution for everyone involved, she said smoothly. It will remove any doubt about your abilities. Darnell wanted to argue. He wanted to ask why none of the other top scorers were being asked to retake the exam. He wanted to point out that the only thing that made his score suspicious was the color of his skin, but he knew that saying any of that would only make things worse, and if I refuse? He asked quietly. Mrs. Patterson's smile was thin and cold. Then I'm afraid the district will have no choice but to invalidate your score pending further investigation. You'll be removed from consideration for any scholarships or awards, and there will be a note in your academic record indicating that your results were ... inconclusive. Inconclusive, a polite way of saying he cheated without actually proving it. A mark that would follow him to every college application, every job interview, every opportunity for the rest of his life. Mr. Hoffman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even he seemed to realize how unfair this was. But he didn't say anything. Darnell looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly, not from fear this time, from anger. Pure, burning anger. He had done everything right. He had followed the rules. He had worked harder than anyone, and now he was being punished for it. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because he had done something right that people like Mrs. Patterson couldn't believe? Fine, he said at last. I'll take the test again. Mrs. Patterson nodded, looking satisfied. I'll arrange it for next week. Mr. Hoffman will proctor the exam, personally, to ensure there are no questions about the conditions. Darnell stood up. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to walk to the door without stumbling. Darnell, Mrs. Patterson called out just as he reached for the handle. He turned. I hope you understand that this isn't personal, she said. I'm just trying to protect the integrity of this institution. Darnell looked at her for a long moment. He thought about all the times she had overlooked him, all the times she had doubted him, all the times she had made him feel like he didn't belong. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. I understand perfectly. He walked out of the classroom and closed the door behind him. The hallway was still empty. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, casting long golden rectangles on the floor. Darnell stood there for a moment, trying to collect himself. He had agreed to retake the exam. He had no choice. But as he stood alone in that empty hallway, a new feeling began to replace the anger. Determination. They wanted proof? Fine, he would give them proof. He would take their test and score just as high as before. Higher, if he could. And when he did, there would be no more room for doubt. No more whispers. No more suspicion. Mrs. Patterson thought she was protecting the integrity of her institution. But she had made a mistake. She had underestimated him, and that was something she was going to regret. Darnell adjusted his backpack and started walking toward the exit. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just getting started. Darnell didn't say anything on the bus ride home. He sat in the back with his headphones in, staring out the window at the passing streets. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It should have been beautiful. But all Darnell could think about was the look on Mrs. Patterson's face. That smug, satisfied expression when he agreed to retake the exam. She thought she had won. She thought she had put him in his place. By the time he got home, it was almost dark. His mother's car was already in the driveway, which surprised him. She usually worked late at the hospital on Thursdays. He found her in the kitchen, still wearing her scrubs, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. You're home early, he said. Dropping his backpack by the door, she turned to look at him, and immediately her expression changed. Mothers have a way of knowing when something is wrong. They can see it in your eyes, in the way you hold your shoulders, in the things you don't say. What happened? She asked. Darnell tried to smile. Nothing. Just tired. But she wasn't buying it. She turned off the stove and walked over to him, placing her hands on his shoulders. Darnell, talk to me. And so he did. He told her everything. The announcement in class, Mrs. Patterson's reaction, the meeting with the man from the district, the accusation that he had cheated. The demand that he retake the exam to prove his innocence. His mother listened without interrupting. Her face remained calm, but Darnell could see something building behind her eyes. A quiet storm. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she pulled him into a hug, holding him tight. "I am so proud of you," she whispered. "Don't you ever forget that." When she pulled back, her expression had changed. The softness was gone. In its place was something harder, fiercer. "They want you to take the test again? Fine, you'll take it. And you'll show them exactly who they're dealing with." She paused. "But we're not doing this alone. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling the school. And your father." Darnell's parents had been divorced since he was 8 years old. His father lived across the city and worked as an attorney specializing in civil rights cases. They didn't see each other as often as Darnell would have liked. But whenever there was a problem, whenever someone tried to push him around, his father was always there. The next morning, Darnell stayed home from school. His mother had called the principal's office first thing, demanding a meeting. She used her calm, professional voice, the one she used when dealing with difficult doctors at the hospital, the one that made it clear she wasn't asking Dot. By 10 o'clock, his father arrived. He was a tall man with graying hair and glasses that made him look like a professor. He carried a leather briefcase and wore the kind of suit that meant business. "Tell me everything," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "Don't leave anything out." Darnell went through the story again. His father took notes on a yellow legal pad, asking questions along the way. What exactly did Mrs. Patterson say? Who else was in the room? Did anyone mention specific evidence of cheating, or was it all based on suspicion? When Darnell finished, his father set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "They have nothing," he said flatly. "No evidence. No witnesses. Nothing but a teacher who can't believe a black student outperformed everyone else." He shook his head. "I've seen this 100 times. It's discrimination, plain and simple. And they're going to answer for it." The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. Darnell, his mother, and his father arrived at Westbrook Preparatory Academy together. They walked through the front doors side by side, and Darnell couldn't help but notice the looks they received from the staff. The receptionist's eyes went wide when she saw them. A teacher passing in the hallway did a double take. They were escorted to the principal's office. Dr. Crawford was a heavy-set man with a bald head and a permanent look of concern on his face. He stood up when they entered, shaking hands with each of them. "Thank you for coming in," he said. "I understand there's been some concern about the handling of Darnell's test results." "Concern is putting it mildly," Darnell's father said. He didn't raise his voice, but there was an edge to it that made Dr. Crawford shift uncomfortably in his seat. "My son achieved the highest score in the district. Instead of being celebrated, he's being treated like a criminal. I'd like to know why." Dr. Crawford cleared his throat. "I assure you, Mr. Williams, there's no accusation of criminal behavior. Mrs. Patterson simply felt that, given the exceptional nature of the score, it would be appropriate to verify the results." "Verify the results," Darnell's mother repeated. "And how many other students with exceptional scores are being asked to verify their results?" Silence. "That's what I thought," she continued. "My son is the only one. And we all know why." Dr. Crawford looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "I understand your concerns, and I want to assure you that Westbrook does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Mrs. Patterson's request was made independently, and I was not consulted beforehand." "Then you should have put a stop to it the moment you found out," Darnell's father said. "Instead, my son was pulled into a meeting, interrogated, and told that if he didn't agree to retake the exam, his score would be invalidated and his academic record would be marked." He leaned forward. "Do you have any idea how damaging that is? Not just to his future, but to his sense of self-worth?" Dr. Crawford was sweating now. "I apologize for how this was handled, truly, but I think the best path forward is to allow Darnell to retake the exam and put this matter to rest." "No," everyone turned to look at Darnell. He had been quiet throughout the meeting, letting his parents do the talking. But now he spoke up, his voice steady. No, he said again. I'm not going to retake the test just because Mrs. Patterson doesn't believe I'm smart enough. That's not fair and it's not right. His father put a hand on his shoulder. What do you want to do, son? Darnell thought about it. He thought about all those nights studying alone in his room. All the sacrifices his mother had made to send him to this school. All the times he had been overlooked and underestimated. I'll take the test, he said finally. But not because I have to prove anything to them. I'll take it because I want to. Because when I score just as high as before, there won't be anywhere left for them to hide. They'll have to admit they were wrong. His mother squeezed his hand. His father nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll do, his father said. He turned back to Dr. Crawford. But let me be very clear. If my son's score is verified, and I have no doubt that it will be, we expect a formal apology. A public one. And we'll be filing a complaint with the school board regarding Mrs. Patterson's conduct. Dr. Crawford nodded quickly. Of course. Of course. We want to resolve this as smoothly as possible. They left the principal's office with a date set for the retest. 1 week away. 7 days to prepare for the most important exam of his life. Again, but this time, Darnell wasn't scared. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. The whole school had doubted him. His teacher had tried to tear him down. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had given him something to fight for, and Darnell Williams never backed down from a fight. The week leading up to the retest was unlike anything Darnell had ever experienced. Word about what was happening had spread far beyond the walls of Westbrook Preparatory Academy. Someone had posted about it on social media. Then someone else shared it. And before long, the story had taken on a life of its own. Students from other schools started reaching out. Some sent messages of support. Others shared their own stories of being doubted and dismissed because of the color of their skin. A local newspaper called the house asking for an interview. Darnell's mother politely declined. They didn't want this to become a circus. They just wanted justice, but the attention had an effect on Westbrook. Teachers who had never spoken to Darnell before suddenly smiled at him in the hallways. Students who had whispered behind his back now avoided eye contact altogether. And Mrs. Patterson? She had taken a few sick days. Nobody knew if she was actually sick or just hiding from the storm she had created. Through it all, Darnell stayed focused. Every night after school, he studied. He reviewed his notes, worked through practice problems, and tested himself over and over again. His father had hired a tutor to help him prepare, a retired chemistry professor from the local university who volunteered. His time after hearing what had happened. You already know this material better than most of my former students, the old professor told him one evening. The test isn't going to be your problem. The real challenge is going to be walking into that room and keeping your head clear. He was right. The hardest part wasn't the chemistry. It was the pressure, the weight of knowing that everyone was watching. The fear that one small mistake could give his doubters exactly what they wanted, but Darnell refused to let that fear control him. He had come too far, worked too hard. He wasn't going to let anyone take this away from him. The morning of the retest arrived cold and gray. Darnell woke up before his alarm, his stomach tight with nerves. He showered, got dressed, and came downstairs to find his mother already in the kitchen. She had made his favorite breakfast. Pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream, the kind she only made on special occasions. You don't have to eat if you're not hungry, she said softly. But I wanted you to know how proud I am, no matter what happens today. Darnell hugged her. He couldn't find the right words, so he just held on for a moment longer than usual. His father picked him up at 8 o'clock sharp. They drove to the school in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that happens when two people understand each other completely. When words aren't necessary. When they arrived at Westbrook, there was a small crowd gathered near the entrance. Students, parents, even a few reporters with cameras. Darnell's father put a hand on his shoulder. You ready? Darnell nodded. Yeah, I'm ready. They walked through the crowd together. People called out words of encouragement. A few students from his chemistry class gave him thumbs up. One girl he barely knew was holding a sign that said, "We believe you." Darnell, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry inside the school. They were met by Dr. Crawford and Mr. Hoffman. The man from the district's academic integrity office, Mrs. Patterson, was notably absent. She felt it would be best if she wasn't present for the exam, Dr. Crawford explained quickly, to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Darnell's father raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. They were led to a small conference room that had been set up for the test. A single desk sat in the middle of the room. On it was a test booklet, a scantron sheet, and 2 freshly sharpened pencils. A clock on the wall showed the time. 8:45. The exam would begin at 9 and last for 3 hours. Mr. Hoffman explained the rules. No bathroom breaks without an escort. No electronic devices. No talking. The exam would be filmed by a camera in the corner of the room, and Mr. Hoffman would remain present the entire time. "Do you have any questions?" he asked. Darnell shook his head. "Then whenever you're ready, you may begin." Darnell sat down at the desk. He took a deep breath. Then he picked up a pencil and opened the test booklet. The next 3 hours were a blur. The questions were hard. Different from the first exam, just as they had promised. But the concepts were the same. The principles were the same. And Darnell knew them inside and out. He worked through each section methodically. Chemistry first, then biology, then physics. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He read each question carefully, considered his options, and chose the best answer. When he wasn't sure, he made an educated guess and moved on. By the time he reached the final section, his hand was cramping and his eyes were starting to blur. But he pushed through. One question at a time. One answer at a time. Until finally, mercifully, he reached the last problem. He filled in the final bubble, set down his pencil, and looked up at the clock. 2 hours and 53 minutes. He had finished with 7 minutes to spare. Mr. Hoffman collected the test booklet and the scantron sheet. "The results will be scored by an independent third party," he said. "We should have them within 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 more days of waiting. 2 more days of not knowing." Darnell walked out of the conference room to find his parents waiting in the hallway. His mother rushed forward and wrapped him in a hug. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired," he admitted. "But good. I think I did good." His father clapped him on the back. "That's my boy." They left the school together, ignoring the reporters who shouted questions at them. Darnell climbed into the back seat of his father's car and closed his eyes. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. He fell asleep before they even made it out of the parking lot. The next 2 days were agony. Darnell tried to go about his normal routine, but it was impossible to concentrate on anything. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart jumped. Every time someone knocked on the door, he held his breath. Finally, on the second evening, the call came. His father answered. Darnell and his mother stood nearby, watching his face for any sign of what was being said. His expression gave nothing away. He listened for a long moment, said, "I see," a few times, and then thanked whoever was on the other end before hanging up. The silence was unbearable. "Well?" Darnell's mother demanded. His father turned to face them. And then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. 98%, he said. Second highest score in the district. Darnell felt his knees go weak. 98%. Not quite perfect this time, but close. So close. The district has officially verified your original score, his father continued. There will be no further investigation. And Mrs. Patterson has been asked to appear before the school board to explain her conduct. Darnell's mother let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She pulled Darnell into another hug, squeezing him so tight he could barely breathe. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it?" Darnell hugged her back, tears stinging his eyes. He had done it. Despite everything. Despite the doubt and the accusations and the pressure. He had proven himself, but even as the relief washed over him, a small part of him felt something else. Something heavier. He shouldn't have had to prove himself. Not like this. Not twice. The victory was real. But so was the injustice that had made it necessary. And Darnell knew that this fight wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been doubted because of who they were. Everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The battle was won. But the war was far from over. The school board meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the district's main administrative building. It was a large room with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Usually these meetings were quiet affairs. A handful of parents complaining about bus routes or lunch menus. Maybe a debate about the school calendar. Tonight was different. Every seat was filled. People lined the walls and spilled out into the hallway. News cameras were set up in the back. The story had grown bigger than anyone had expected. What started as one teacher doubting one student had become something much larger. A conversation about fairness, about assumptions, about who gets believed and who gets questioned. Darnell sat in the front row between his parents. He was wearing his best suit, the one his mother had bought him for his cousin's wedding last year. His palms were sweating, but he kept his hands still in his lap. He had learned a lot over the past few weeks. How to stay calm when everything inside him was screaming. How to hold his head high when people were watching and waiting for him to fall. Apart. Mrs. Patterson sat at a small table facing the board. She looked different than Darnell remembered. Smaller somehow. The confidence that had always surrounded her like armor seemed to have cracked. She kept her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. Avoiding the stares from the crowd, the board chairman, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, called the meeting to order. She explained that they were there to review the conduct of Mrs. Patterson regarding the treatment of a student following the regional science competition. She emphasized that this was not a trial, but an inquiry to determine whether district policies had been violated. Then they asked Mrs. Patterson to speak. She cleared her throat and began. Her voice was quieter than usual, missing its usual sharp edge. "I've been teaching for 23 years, she said. In that time, I've always tried to uphold the highest standards of academic integrity. When I saw the test results, I was surprised. I felt it was my responsibility to ensure that the score was legitimate. I never intended to single anyone out or cause harm." She paused, glancing briefly toward Darnell before looking away. "In hindsight, I understand that my actions may have been perceived differently than I intended. For that, I apologize." May have been perceived differently. Darnell felt his jaw tighten. She still couldn't admit what she had done. She was still hiding behind careful words and half-truths. The board members asked her several questions. Had she requested verification for any other students? No. Had she had any previous concerns about this student's academic honesty? No. What specific evidence had led her to suspect cheating? She hesitated. There was no specific evidence, she admitted. Just a feeling. Those 3 words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the room understood what they really meant. She had doubted him not because of anything he had done, but because of who he was. When the board finished questioning Mrs. Patterson, they invited Darnell to speak. His father gave him an encouraging nod. His mother squeezed his hand. Darnell stood up and walked to the small podium that had been set up for speakers. He looked out at the crowd. So many faces. Some he recognized, most he didn't. All of them watching him. Waiting to hear what he had to say, he took a deep breath and began. When I found out I got a perfect score on the science competition, I was proud. I had worked so hard for so long. I thought it was the happiest moment of my life. He paused. But then Mrs. Patterson announced the results, and instead of congratulating me, she said there must have been a mistake. She said she needed to verify my score. And just like that, my happiest moment became one of the worst. The room was completely silent. I had to take the test again. I had to prove that I didn't cheat, even though there was no evidence that I did. I had to go through all of that because one person couldn't believe that someone like me could succeed. He looked directly at Mrs. Patterson for the first time. I'm not angry anymore. I was, for a while, but being angry takes too much energy. And I realized that what happened to me wasn't really about me. It was about something bigger. It was about the assumptions people make, the boxes they try to put us in, the limits they set for us before we even have a chance to show what we can do. He turned back to the board. I'm not here to ask for Mrs. Patterson to be punished. That's not my decision to make. But I am here to ask that this never happens to another student. That no one else has to go through what I went through just because someone had a feeling about them. He stepped back from the podium. The room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet. His mother was crying. His father was smiling wider than Darnell had ever seen. The board deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the chairman announced their decision. Mrs. Patterson would be placed on administrative leave pending a full review of her conduct. She would be required to complete training on implicit bias and equitable treatment of students. And a formal letter of apology would be sent to Darnell and his family, to be placed in his permanent academic record alongside documentation clearing him of any wrongdoing. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was a start. After the meeting, Darnell was surrounded by people wanting to shake his hand, pat him on the back, tell him how brave he was. Reporters asked for interviews. Students from his school promised things would be different now, but the moment Darnell would remember most came later that night. After everyone had gone home and the cameras had been packed away, he was sitting on the front porch of his house, looking up at the stars. The air was cold, but he didn't mind. It felt good after the heat of the crowded meeting room. His mother came outside and sat down beside him. For a while, neither of them said anything. They just sat together listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. I'm proud of you, she said finally. Not because of your test scores or your speeches or any of that. I'm proud of you because of who you are. Because you didn't let them break you. Darnell felt a lump form in his throat. I almost did, he admitted. There were times when I wanted to give up. When I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong. His mother shook her head. You belong anywhere you want to be. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. She put her arm around him. And they sat there together as the night grew darker and the stars grew brighter. A few weeks later, Darnell received his official award at the district ceremony. He stood on stage in front of hundreds of people and accepted the trophy for the highest score in the region. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. His parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride. But as Darnell held that trophy in his hands, he realized something. The award wasn't the real victory. The real victory was standing there at all. It was refusing to be erased. It was proving, not to them but to himself, that he was exactly who he always knew. He was smart, capable, worthy, and no one could ever take that away from him. As he walked off the stage, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a window. A young black man in a suit, holding a trophy, smiling. He looked like someone who had been through a storm and come out the other side. He looked like someone who was just getting started.